Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 138. Quick reminder, please follow the live stream on LinkedIn. That really helps us. Our guest today is Prem Churklevich, co-founder and CEO of Relock. Welcome, Prem. How'd I do? I butchered your last name.
Thank you, Mike. No, that was actually impeccable. That was great. Yeah, great to be here.
So cool. So before we dive into the actual topic, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you find yourself in the identity MFA space?
Sure. Yeah. So that was a lot of it was pure luck. To be honest, I am originally from Poland. I used to study in Spain, and I got straight after graduation into the consulting world, and I started working with advanced complex technologies. Hi, Eve. And it's actually one of a part of my wheelhouse is to make sure that things are understandable and they reach the market. And I've spent multiple years working as a consultant on the technology development front. And as any consultant, I was always dying to jump to an actual what we call to jump to business. So when an opportunity presented itself, I met Martin, my co-founder. I loved the idea, and I decided to basically jump ship and join him full time at Relock. Both of us, interestingly, were coming out from outside of the IAM space. Martin had some experience with fraud prevention, with cybersecurity before. I did not, so it was a steep learning curve. But after a couple of years of working on the product, here we are with something hopefully interesting to present.
Cool. And so the topic today is what on earth is silent MFA? And I guess let's start there. Maybe sort of under the hood. How does this actually work? It sounds like you're talking about a mobile device.
So it's not only a mobile device. It's a part of the equation for sure. But what we actually mean by silent MFA, if we think about one of the key problems of MFA right now, it's typically not the available technologies. We do have some pretty advanced options for authentication of users. It's typically the user side that is making things a bit more challenging, right? Because we have, even though we can offer a host of different options, the users are very often reticent to adopt. And they're leaving us on the application side in harm's way. So the idea we had was, okay, what if we can have a secure MFA that is invisible to the user, that is silent? Can we authenticate someone completely in the background? And of course, we're here in the field of passive authentication, right? And when we think about passive authentication, the way it's described by, let's say, Gartner or KuppingerCole, we are in the space of behavioral and contextual signals. We wanted to bring something different. So this is cryptographic trust. Cryptographic trust that is in the background of an active session and authenticates the user without the user even knowing, essentially. I think you may be on mute, Mike. Or is it just me not hearing you, or?
Oh, you're right. Another first.
Yeah,
I hit my mute because when I turned off my fan, I hit my mute. So I'm laughing because I was about to grab my dog because I always make this joke about how my dog knows it's me, like how users actually, you're right, they really don't want to know anything about MFA. Ideally, they never want the best user experience is like no user experience at all.
Just let me in. Yeah.
And I remember like years and years ago, there was this guy at MIT Media Lab, I forget who, and he's like, when my device should just know it's me, or and I used to joke that my dog actually knows that it's me, like, and it can be dark even. So, and he's 100% sure it's me. He has some very good sensors on board. And unfortunately, Floki is not around. He's kind of a scaredy cat, and I think it's too loud for him in here.
But that's exactly right.
Like, and how do you know? And when you say we know it's you, what is it that knows? Like, which device is it that actually is running the resource that we're trying to protect here?
Yeah, yeah. So I think with an important thing to think about when we speak about passive authentication is when we, if you Google the term, right, there will be a bunch of different software options coming up from different providers, both small and large, that typically used to be in the space of account takeover prevention. And they tell you we're not as good as your dog is because we give you 99% accuracy based on 2,000 different signals. We can kind of say that it is you coming back to the application. And this is one of the core reasons why we cannot use them as a factor of authentication, because defined this way, right? Any behavioral or any heuristic method of authentication cannot be a
Uh-huh.
factor. So what we do is we put a system of cryptographic keys in the user's browser. Right. Once the user has enrolled this new credential, and we can go into that a bit more if we want to, but there's multiple ways to enroll the credential, from very simple to very, very high assurance. But basically, once you have passed through this first enrollment, the way you would pass through enrollment of a passkey or a FIDO key or a Ubico key, um, we basically put a system of cryptographic keys in your browser, and every time you come back to the application, we can on demand verify that you still have the right version of the key. A unique feature that we have, which makes it that much more secure, is that we are using one-time keys only. We're using a fresh cryptographic key every time. So our challenge, and we
So
actually have
you're
a,
talking about ephemeral keys, basically.
that's right, but I'm just not using the word ephemeral keys, because I've seen ephemeral used for keys that are changed every 24 hours or every 3 months. So the ephemerality of the key is a bit of a subjective issue. We're basically renewing the key every time you use it.
Hmm.
Every time you call the key, the challenge itself will rotate the key, and then the browser component has to prove that it can rotate the key in the exact same way as the server side did, and it does so by providing a token, which is without any value to a potential attacker. It doesn't have any cryptographically relevant information in it. So essentially, it's like I'm challenging you to prove that, like, you can do the same thing that I just did.
Hmm.
And we both store the keys securely on our sites without exchanging them, without disclosing them.
How do you where do you store the keys in the browser?
It's one of the key questions. How do you make something in the browser secure?
Yeah.
Um, so this is part of, so I cannot disclose it fully. This is part of our, let's say, secret sauce, part of our patent application. But essentially, we're using the entire browser environment. So the
Uh-huh.
key is the way fragmented. It's actually multiple keys that are at work. And they are the core key, the one-time key, the ephemeral key, if you want to call it this way, is encrypted in the local storage in such way that it can only be decrypted with another part of the key that the server holds. So
Huh.
the server
Okay.
can decrypt its own version of the key only in communication with the customer or the client, and the customer can decrypt its own key only in communication
Yeah.
with the server.
I've heard a number of seen a number of implementations of this type of um, multiple keys generate another key, which is then used as the actual. Let's say so the cryptographic output of the key is input to another cryptographic function, which then basically allows you to create a new key consistently.
Yeah.
Um, they use that in the wallet in the crypto world. They
Mhm.
use this approach. I've seen it used elsewhere too. Um, so that's what you're saying is basically there's basically multiple keys that must be combined, sort of like you have your launch keys where you have one. You need to control both keys in order um, to be able to operate.
That's
And
right. If you wanted to impersonate a legitimate user, you would need to grab all the components of the passive authentication keys from the
mhm,
browser, and it's not impossible, right? We know that no system is 100% secure. You could do it, but you need to compromise the endpoint. You need to compromise browser fully, and it's additionally protected with a device fingerprint. And even if you did that, here's where the ephemerality comes into play. Because even if you did that, if you grab all the components of the passive authentication keys from the browser side, you can only use what you stole as long as the legitimate user is inactive. Because the first activity from the legitimate user will trigger a collision of keys on the server side, right? Because you cannot use the key without triggering a renewal of the key, without triggering key rotation. So the
I see.
server side will know that this user has been compromised because the keys will clash. That's why you call
Hmm.
it. It's not immediate. My CTO always says it's not immediate detection of a compromised user, but it's an inevitable detection of a compromised user.
Hmm. Okay, so it's based on the browser, um, but there's no connection between the browser and the user. The browser is not the user. The browser is a piece of software.
That's
So how do you actually connect this to a human?
That's correct. So this is why we say it's an invisible MFA, not invisible authentication. What we provide is like a very, very secure zero trust trusted device, or zero trust remember me, in a way, where
Hmm.
you have at the same time you have a long-lived, let's call it a long-lived session, but with a fresh key at every single transaction. But we ourselves, we say this is to be used in combination with another authentication factor. And it can be a password, because we know that for many people, especially on the CIAM side, many people are not super comfortable with like fully passwordless solutions. So if you want to use it with a password, go ahead. You can use it with a passkey. That would be our preference. If you actually use it with a passkey to provide two factors of authentication, right? One biometric slash cryptographic, one cryptographic possession factor in the background.
Right. I like the remember me example because that's really what it seems to me. Like it's a sort of enhanced remember me. Like remember me normally means like write a cookie to the browser,
That's right.
right? So it sounds like this is sort of a more thoroughly designed security solution for remember me that's harder
That's
um,
right. That's
to
right.
mimic.
And what we've heard, and that's also true. People are saying, well, what if I use something like DBSC, right? If I use a device-bound session credential. Well, first of all, the fact that you can do something based on an open standard, we think it's great. But then the implementation side, perhaps it's more difficult than what you would get with Relock, and it's only session protection. We provide protection across sessions, right, throughout the lifetime of the user. So to talk about limitations of it, given this is browser based, of course, if you erase your browser, or you reinstall your browser, or you do anything that would remove the cookies completely from your browser, you will need to again kind of re-authenticate, re-establish trust with the browser. So this is one of the limitations. But this, for many of the use cases, and we're not saying to replace everything. All MFI should be replaced with Relock, but there
Yeah,
are very specific and particular use cases where this is probably the best solution to get secure MFA without any customer friction.
yeah. Well, it's better for startups to stay in very distinct lanes. So you're saying we're not even in the MFA lane. We're just in this one very specific portion of the um, let's say remember advanced remember me lane.
That's
Um,
for Ermi Lane that you can use as an authentication factor. That's right. And this is for, if you think about CIAM use cases where you have people that. So I actually spoke. It's a bit of an anecdote, but I spoke with a big retailer in the US, and I asked them about their deployment of passkeys, and they said, "Oh, it's going great. Like we hit 20% adoption after a couple
oh, that's
of
really
months."
good. Yeah,
That's good, right? And then we're happy that 20% of users. That's amazing. But would you expect the users that are the most prone to fall victim of credential-based attacks to be in the latter 80%? Probably yes. I don't have a data set for it, but probably yes. So what do you do about the rest? You can keep educating. You can keep urging them to
yeah,
switch to MFA, or you can deploy Relook in the background and get them covered, essentially without any action needed on their side.
yeah. Well, it's just a risk management call, right?
Yeah,
So the fact that 20% of your users are using passkeys, the limit, but you still have risk. So you still got to worry about the rest of the risk. I think that's true. So it's interesting, it is an authentication factor. You're saying we perform some type of identification that allowed us to make an association with this particular browser. And now we're able to look at the cryptographic evidence and say, look, I really think it is this browser. There's a high likelihood it is this same browser, which we know to be associated with this person. Do you issue some type of JWT assertion that can be recorded in the audit log so that we can consider this as evidence in our policies? So maybe you want a policy that says, I only want to allow, or we could have a policy that says if this is an untrusted browser, maybe I go through re-enrollment, for example.
Yes. So that's exactly how it works in the very basic deployment. In the basic deployment, what we would recommend people do is they set up a redirect at the moment of access, not necessarily as a sign-in, but the moment of access of a user coming back to the application. Redirect to either reloc service or have it self-hosted. Verify the device and treat that as the first factor of authentication. And based on the security signal that's coming back as a JWT, you can decide what do we do next, right? If it's a trusted device for this ID, I only ask for a password or I ask for nothing at all. If right now I'm trusting the session cookie, I ask for nothing at all and I just let them in with one FA. Or I do a step-up authentication to reestablish trust with this new device.
Right. And what do you tell them exactly? Like, what is the assertion? So you're sending them back a JWT, and does that JWT just says relock passed, or is there more detail on what you can tell them about that silent authentication you did in the background?
Mm-hmm. So that's configurable for the administrator. That depends on what they want to get. We are very privacy conscious, right? So if what you want to get from us is just a simple assertion of whether or not this is a trusted device for this ID, that's perfectly possible. If not, of course, there's a multiple other things we can tell you. Like we can tell you, the kind of device the user is coming from in theory, right? We could tell you that. We can tell you the last validated session, but this is something that we for now we would like to leave that outside of the flow because we want people to get familiar first with how to use the Redux security signals. And by the way, speaking of signals, this is also why we decided to join the CAPE working group, so we can share these signals across the broader ecosystem as CAPE events.
And just interestingly, Sean O'Dell is going to be talking about CAPE and SSF Thursday.
Yeah, it's a great initiative. It makes it a lot easier for us to plug into the ecosystem as a smaller company, as a startup.
Mm-hmm. So okay. So you're issuing some type of signal, let's say back to the IDP about the trustworthiness of this particular ID. Now you mentioned the privacy by design. You don't really need the ID. You should actually have some type of pairwise identifier with the customer, right? You don't actually have the ID. You just have some hash or some other pairwise.
Right. Yeah, identifier. That's right. I'm saying ID for the simplicity's sake, but that's right. We don't need to have the email of the user coming back. We can just have a hash. Yeah. Or even with the simplest deployment possible, if the customer for some reason they don't want us to know anything about the user, we can just tell them, have we seen this device before or not, and what is the device ID that we assigned, and you can do it on your end. You can pair it with user ID and decide what you want to do with this next, right? It requires some more work on your end, on the application end, but it's perfectly possible for us to be kind of just an advanced deterministic account takeover prevention screen in a way.
Now, there's a number of companies that will will provide you enhanced information about things like IP addresses. Deduce comes to mind. They have an API. But are you planning to do you do anything besides establishing the cryptographic identification with that browser? Do you do any other type of analysis on sort of the context of that to return any risk signals?
Yes. So we do IP right now. We can also do impossible travel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but one
You
of
do
the
impossible travel. That means you basically have to do VPN detection, right? Because
yeah,
impossible travel is very possible with a VPN.
yes. But one of the core arguments that we make is that we are different than probabilistic analysis of these signals, right? We actually give you a deterministic response of whether or not someone has a credential, because our key is essentially a credential. But yes, we do have the possibility to add these additional risk signals.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And
and by the way, we are also we have an open telemetry transmitter set up. So if you wanted to use this as a monitoring tool in a way, not to use it directly in your authentication flow, which is the recommended option, but to kind of export that to any observability tools you might have, any SIEM tools you might have, that's also possible. We would say that this is probably more for the POC stage when you're getting familiar with how it works and you're trying to gauge, what kind of signals you're going to get. But it's also possible.
I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about more of the potential of CAPE and SSF, because if you don't have the ID from a privacy perspective, what signal can you actually like share because you don't know who the user is?
Yeah, no, so it depends on the integration. We did pairwise testing with the standard cape transmitter. We did pairwise testing with Signal, and then of course what we return is a user. Well, we need to know the user ID, and then we return the signal about session revocation. That the session should be revoked because we have detected a compromised device. So in these cases, yes, we need to be able to tell you who you're talking about.
Yeah. So okay. So or the IDP itself could do that. The IDP,
Yeah.
there's no reason for a relock to know about the user. You're a third party. I would think you would consider this to be like toxic waste. Like you don't want this PII. It's not worth the
We don't. We definitely don't. But you can have Redux self hosted, and then it's your
self-hosted,
yeah.
right? Um, and okay. So the main signal that you're thinking about sending then is basically an account takeover where you can say, this looks fishy because this person's asserting this identity from this browser that we can't verify, that hasn't been verified. Why is that actually um, noteworthy? Because how do you know that's not just a new browser for the person?
So that's an interesting one, and there's multiple layers here, right? Depending on the attack vector, we can tell you different things. There are cases where, for example, someone is coming um, from a new device, right? Then we will tell you we haven't seen this device before, and then you decide what to do with it, right? You know the password is right because you're checking the password, but we tell
Right.
you we haven't seen this device before. So then you can decide, as we discussed before, right? You can decide, okay, I'm going to do step-up authentication because this is a new device, right? This is a device that needs a new trust. Now, this is just one use case. The other one, which is also very interesting, is when you are doing relog verification on a continuous basis, because we can, as I mentioned, we can do it on demand. So it doesn't have to be a redirect at the beginning of a session. You can have it using a very small JavaScript SDK that we have. You can have it running in the background of an active session, and then you
Hmm.
can verify the user almost, well, not almost, essentially at every single request to the application. Of course, you can tune it down. You can do it every minute, every couple of minutes, every critical action that the user takes. And then what we give you the possibility of is if you see an authenticated session token, but there is no trusted key. This is a case where we know for a fact that this device, the device has been compromised, user has been compromised, because there should never be the case of someone having at the same time no relock key and an authenticated session token. If they have authenticated, they must have passed through the relock gate before. So in these cases, we can tell you yes, this user has been compromised. And to your question about the value of telling you this is a new device, this is, first of all, it lowers friction for the user, right? If you want to implement strong MFA, what you can do with relock very easily is say, okay, I'm going to use password and relock, and whenever I see a new device, I'm going to send a magic link over email, let's say, out of the simplest options, right? Or I'm going to do an IDV flow.
That is so annoying, by the way, because they're like, okay, let's send a notification to the thing most likely to be compromised with the least amount of integrity verification.
Yeah,
Let's,
of course.
yeah.
So, but essentially, that's what I mentioned before about the credential and.
I just want to point out the hypocrisy of a lot of this security stuff, because I just find that to be the illusion of security, but not actually security. That's like boxes.
I wouldn't call it hypocrisy. It's probably the burden of practicality. Like, you need to use whatever the customer is going to accept. And I'm actually going to give you, Mike, an interesting case that we have of SMS-based authentication. There are a lot of systems out there, and probably we have all seen them, where you have a heterogeneous, typically elderly, general population-based user base. And a lot of these users are going to accept nothing else for MFA other than SMS. And we all know that this is probably the least desirable and the most expensive second factor that you can have.
Yeah.
What you can do with relock is you can say, okay, if this is the only thing you can do, fine. I'm going to send you one SMS. If it checks, I'm going to issue you the passive authentication keys. And whenever you come back, I'm going to ask you for a password and the passive authentication key, and only send you a new SMS when you come with a new device.
Yeah.
Are we increasing the security here?
Common practice today, in fact. This is common practice today, in fact.
Yeah.
My bank, for example, Chase, does the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but the question is, what are they trusting in the meantime, right? How secure is it? What they're trusting in the meantime? Then we're coming kind of back to the idea of high security.
And the hypocrisy of Chase is that then they'll send me an SMS. Like, so they're using an insecure channel. So, but okay. It's an interesting option. What's been the reaction of customers? And what types of use cases have you seen this really appealing to? It sounds like you're leaning more towards consumer, but what's been the sort of feedback from the real world?
Yeah, so it feels like whenever people are mature enough to have implemented internally on the enterprise side, passkeys go fully passwordless, or they're on the path to passwordless, and they're managing their risks, and they're doing EDR, and they have a well-educated user group. This is on the enterprise side. They feel like this wouldn't add a lot. We say still that it would add the possibility to verify whether or not someone has been compromised because of the inevitable compromise detection. But then there's a lot of these blank spaces, these the white spaces where current strong MFA doesn't reach, like the customer side, B2B side as well. So third party users, partners, vendors, supply channel actors, so on and so forth, where you don't really manage the devices, where you cannot get them to install something on their endpoint. Maybe you're considering a managed browser, right? But again, it's a pretty cumbersome deployment, so on and so forth. These are the cases where we are hearing people want to use it, and where people have been testing that. The SMS use case, that's probably the simplest way to use relock, is one of the door openers for us in a way. And once people see how this can be used for access one-time verification, typically the immediate next question is, okay, if I can use it every single step in the application to do high assurance one-factor authentication in the background, I should consider that for probably some of the higher assurance applications I I have. So I would say it's a learning curve, given that we're bringing something new. It takes people some time to get familiar with the concept, but once they do, it has been quite positive.
So I noticed in the description of the episode, you mentioned that there was some passkey technology involved. Is the basically the idea that you're generating this sort of on the fly key, and that's using to sign, and so the verification method ultimately ends up being a passkey authentication. Where's the authenticator here? How do you generate the private key for the authenticator would be my question.
Yeah. So initially, once you pass through the initial establishment of trust, we're
Hmm.
using ECDAG to generate the first pair of private public key. But what's underneath is a symmetric key, right? So we're using ECDAG to kind of exchange not exchange, to agree on the symmetric key, on the first symmetric key that is going to be used, and then we have our patent pending method of rotating this key with a cryptographic challenge, right? So we're sending a cryptographic challenge that contains no information about the key itself, but based on this challenge, the browser side component can rotate the key in the same way as the server side component has.
So the authenticator actually technically exists on the server,
Uh, the authenticator being the key, yes, but it's inaccessible to the server because it is stored encrypted with the key available to the browser side.
right? And so FIDO is normally, or FIDO 2 is requires an unlock. It's like a lockbox with an unlock. So is the unlock in this case basically the browser that's trusted, and that's what makes it? Is that the second factor in your passkey authenticator?
So we're not calling it a passkey authenticator because it's not FIDO certified, and given it's passive, it doesn't require user interaction. So I don't think it can be called the passkey, properly speaking. But a lot of the mechanisms are similar, right? So there's a private key component,
Yeah.
there's a symmetric key component to it, and if you want to break down the elements, there's actually four elements that come into play. The first element is a type of ID cookie that we have, and this ID cookie allows the server to retrieve the right version of the key and decrypt it. Then we have the challenge that comes back from the server, and the challenge contains the information needed to renew the key on the browser side and decrypt the browser side key. And then we have the key itself that is being used to generate a token that's proof of possession.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably more detail than we needed to go into, but sure some of our audience will like that. But no, it is interesting. It's interesting to sort of get to or sort of flush out a little bit um, how how what the intersection and pattern matching is with FIDO and passkeys. I don't know. I kind of use the two things interchangeably on this today. By the way,
Yeah,
I feel like passkeys is more user friendly. Nobody knows what FIDO is, but
I agree. I agree. It's just that we've heard some stories about people getting a bit of a slap on the wrist for saying something's a passkey where, you know,
hey, it's passkey lowercase for a reason, right? There shouldn't be no, but a lot of those people are, yeah, they'll be very sensitive if, especially if they consider what something that doesn't match exactly what they're calling a passkey.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Um, and what's been the biggest surprise for you in terms of getting this business off the ground and building the technology and launching it from a marketing business perspective? Um, um, what has been surprising to you so far?
So I think there's on the technical side, I would say it's the fact that we came with this a bit of an idealistic notion that if we can show that something is more secure, it's an immediate yes. And there's a lot more to it, as we know right now, and as probably everybody in the audience knows. And luckily for us, we were able to also realize that, well, it's not only secure, it's also very, very easy to implement, and we can actually cover a lot of the use cases that other authenticators cannot. And that was probably one big surprise from the let's say go to market, or like the business side. We were actually very positively surprised with how closely knit the ecosystem is, and how relatively easy it is. If you're coming with something that people like, it is relatively easy to kind of come into the fold and start developing new friends, even, I would say, at the risk of at the risk of sounding a bit cliche here. Uh, and you go to a couple of conferences, and you meet people that are also very much security minded, and they love to talk about the standards, and it just it's one big IAM family. And I think a part of that is maybe the fact that IAM used to be so separate from what cybersecurity is,
Hmm.
that it became a separate bubble, and we were lucky enough to get into this bubble and get really good advisors on our part, and that kind of helped us to come into this group.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty mature market, and I think that there is a spirit of collaboration in in our industry in particular, because we collaborate on standards. So there's lines of communication already open, and so I do think we have a unusually collaborative industry. And I know you were talking. Eve Mailer introduced us,
That's right.
actually, and she's been a long time. I think she might have even invented the term adaptive authentication, which really fits to me like is a good metaphor for exactly what you're advocating for. Is that you want to be smarter about when you want to re-authenticate. Did she mention that term to you, or have you heard that term, adaptive authentication?
Yes, yeah. So we talked with Eve a lot about both adaptive and passive authentication, the continuous aspect of it. Um, and I agree. We are an important factor that can enable people to really switch from at access only to continuous adaptive trust.
Right. Continuous is the new popular jargon. I think Eve was originally coined adaptive authentication, but right now you hear people advocating for continuous authentication. In fact, that is going to be sort of the topic next Thursday. Sean O'Dell is advocating for something called the Event Hub, um, which would be like an asynchronous component in the identity infrastructure, that would maybe react to events like CAPE events or other SSF events, in order um, to enable authorization policies to pull more data about the state of a user session. So
Yeah,
um, sounds like
yeah,
a good idea to me. I don't know. I also think it's kind of hard to get organizations to deploy a new piece of infrastructure that they weren't currently, didn't see as absolutely essential. So it can be a tough sell, but I think with certain companies with enough economies of scale, like certainly hyperscalers like Amazon or Yahoo, will see a benefit in this architecture. But what
and
are
I
your
think
thoughts?
we've seen over the last several events that the support for SSF and for CAPE is very strong, and we've worked with the working group, and it feels like everybody agrees. Like once you've seen it, once you've seen how it works, the immediate response is, "Oh, why haven't we been doing that before?" Right? It's one of these things where like, yeah, this is how it should work. Software, we have all these software tools. They should be speaking to each other, especially in
Yeah.
these high security, high stake situations where you need to exchange these signals.
Mm.
I feel like even though you're absolutely right that adding a new infrastructure component is a tough sell, I feel like we're going to go there. It feels like there's enough critical mass behind Cape.
Yeah, I'm less convinced, but we'll talk about that on Thursday. Um, I'm not convinced that we need this another infrastructure, um, or or maybe if we're just looking at CAPE as a specialized issuer of JWTs, maybe. Um, but yeah, I think it's TBD
Hmm.
if this will actually get traction. Um, a lot of specs, the specs that tend to be really successful are the ones where people come together and standardize something they're already doing versus the one where they invent something new. Um, and so I don't know. I think there's a lot of unsolved problems in security right now. Um, and I do think we need more tokens that describe the state of security. And those tokens should be input to policy. So to the extent that CAPE and SSF want to issue some new tokens, I like that. Um, but yeah, I think that nobody knows really, like with AI, there's so much uncertainty. Um, I'm sure everybody has to have an answer on AI. How does AI intersect with this? It's gotten a lot better at breaking stuff. Does cryptographic proof become more important when AI predictive ability fails?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we've actually started in 2023. The one of the first concepts we had was for an API version of Relog, like server to server communication, which works great as an additional factor of authentication on top of OAuth, um, and would be a very good fit for AI agents. But right now we are feeling that it's a bit too early just yet. I know there's a great many companies are working on different solutions for the MCP servers, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
But at the same time, it feels that we are going at the end of the day, we're going to get an updated version of a standard we're already using, and then we as Renoc, we're happy to kind of swoop in and offer an additional layer of protection on top of that. So we are in a bit of a standby mode while we are focusing on the human authentication side. We're kind of ready to go when the market feels established enough.
yeah. I've been joking on LinkedIn that you throw a rock and you hit 10 MCP
Yeah, yeah.
servers to implement to send 10 MCP proxies. Well, I think this has been a good intro. I know for me, I learned a lot about it. Any last thoughts before we break?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the most important messages that we have is that we know that a lot of people have been investing a lot of time and money into upgrading their authentication posture, and they have been hitting the wall of low customer adoption. And there's a bit of a preconception right now that some of these problems are just impossible to solve. I think our main message is with the silent MFA, with invisible MFA, you can finally tackle these, and there's almost no reason not to do it. There are no more excuses to switch your customers or your partners to secure authentication if you can do it in the background in one go in one day.
Well, I'm a surprisingly skeptical person when it comes to like new stuff, but I see that I think I agree that there's nothing in this lane right now. Something that's better than cookies. I think that this could be a beneficial. And I like the fact that the artifact of this is a JWT, which we can factor into policy. So for what it's worth, I like it. I think it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Uh, but I wish you the best of luck because I know even good ideas are hard to execute. So it's no easy task. So I mentioned already the next episode, so I already sort of was spoiled my announcement. But Sean O'Dell will be joining us next week, and he's going to take the other side of my argument because he's a real strong advocate for this new event hub architecture. Um, he at his closing keynote with Andrew Cameron at Identiverse, he proposed this new architecture or highlighted it. Anyway, we're going to talk about the event hub as a piece of infrastructure and see how they're using it successfully or how he sees it taking off. Anyway, please join us. With that, I'll say, Prem, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.